I never imagined that pretending to be poor would reveal the true wealth or poverty of people's hearts. But that day, standing in front of a cracked mirror, wearing my oldest jacket, I made a choice that would change my son's future forever. Before I go on, if you're listening to this story during a quiet moment, maybe while resting, driving, or trying to clear your thoughts, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. It reminds me that these stories are shared, not told alone. Now, let me tell you how everything truly began. My name is Henry. I am 67 years old, widowed, and a father to one son, Daniel. To the world, I looked like an ordinary retired man living a simple life, and for the most part, that's exactly how I wanted it to appear. But the truth was very different. I had spent over 40 years quietly building a construction business from nothing, brick by brick, contract by contract. I never chased fame, I never lived flashy. I believed money should speak only when necessary. By the time I retired, my name was known in boardrooms, but my face was not. Daniel grew up humble. I raised him that way intentionally. He never knew the full scale of what I owned. He knew we were comfortable, but not wealthy. I wanted him to grow with character, not entitlement. And he did. Daniel was kind, hard-working, respectful. He became an engineer, built his own career, and never once asked me for money. That alone made me proud. Then he told me about Emily. "She's special, Dad," he said one evening over dinner. "Her family is, well, different from ours." I smiled. Different how? "They care a lot about status," he admitted carefully. "Image, appearances." That word, appearances, stuck with me. A few weeks later, Daniel told me he planned to propose. My heart filled with joy, but something uneasy stirred inside me. I had seen enough in life to know one truth. You don't truly know people when things are easy. You know them when they think you have nothing to offer. So I asked Daniel a simple question. "Does her family know much about me?" He hesitated. "Not really. Emily told them you're retired and live modestly." I nodded slowly. That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought about marriages ruined not by lack of love, but by toxic families, by parents who measured worth in cars, homes, and bank accounts, by people who smiled politely while calculating what they could gain. I loved my son too much to leave his future to chance. That's when the idea came to me. I would meet Emily's family as a poor father. No lies spoken, only truths carefully left unsaid. I would arrive in my old sedan instead of my driver-driven car. I would wear my worn brown jacket instead of tailored suits. I would speak softly, humbly, like a man with nothing to impress anyone. And I would watch. Daniel was uncomfortable when I told him. "Dad, you don't have to do that," he said. "Emily loves me, that's enough." "I'm not testing her," I replied calmly. "I'm observing her family. Marriage isn't just between two people, it's between worlds." Reluctantly, he agreed. The dinner was set for Sunday evening at Emily's parents' house. As I drove there, my heart was steady, but my eyes were open. The house alone told me everything before a single word was spoken. Tall iron gates, marble steps, expensive cars parked like trophies. This was a family that believed wealth should be seen from the street. Emily greeted us warmly. Her smile was genuine, her hug was sincere. That eased my heart a little. But then I met her parents. Her father looked me up and down before shaking my hand, his grip firm, his eyes assessing. Her mother's smile froze for half a second when she noticed my shoes. "So Henry, was it?" her father asked. "Yes," I replied politely. "And what do you do?" "I'm retired," I said simply. "From?" he pressed. "Construction," I answered. His eyebrows lifted briefly, then dropped, unimpressed. Dinner began, and that's when the real test started. Questions disguised as conversation. "What neighborhood do you live in? Is your house owned or rented?" Daniel must be ambitious. coming from modest beginnings. Each comment landed softly, but cut sharply. They spoke proudly of their connections, their vacations, their expectations for Emily's future. Not once did they ask about my life, my values, or how I raised my son. At one point, Emily's mother leaned toward Daniel and said with a polite smile, "Marriage is expensive these days, weddings especially. Hopefully expectations are realistic." I watched my son's jaw tighten. And that's when I realized this test wasn't just for them. It was for me too. Could I stay silent? Could I let them underestimate me? Could I endure their quiet judgment for my son's sake? I folded my napkin carefully and looked around the table. This dinner was only the beginning, and what they would soon reveal about themselves would decide everything. The ride home was quiet. Daniel stared out the window, jaw clenched, his fingers tapping lightly against his knee. I didn't say a word at first. Silence, I've learned, often speaks louder than advice. Finally, he exhaled, "Dad, I'm sorry about tonight." I turned to him gently. "You have nothing to apologize for, son." "They didn't mean to be rude," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "They're just like that." I nodded. That's exactly why I needed to see them. He glanced at me, surprised by my calm. "You didn't look upset." "I was observing," I replied. "There's a difference." That night, after Daniel dropped me off, I sat alone in my living room. The walls were simple, the furniture modest. Anyone looking in would think this was the full story of my life. It was. But for the first time in years, I felt the weight of pretending, not because it hurt my pride, but because I had seen something troubling. Emily herself had been kind, respectful, even embarrassed at moments when her parents crossed invisible lines that mattered, but families have gravity, and gravity pulls whether you want it to or not. 2 days later, Daniel called me again. "Dad, Emily's parents want to invite you to lunch, just you." That caught my attention. "Just me?" I asked. "Yes, they said they want to get to know you better." I smiled faintly. "Of course they do." We agreed to meet at a small cafe they selected, not a luxury restaurant, something casual, public. I arrived early, wearing the same worn jacket, the same old shoes. They arrived 10 minutes late. Emily's father sat down across from me, adjusting his watch so it caught the light. Her mother smiled politely, but didn't bother ordering coffee. "Henry," her father began, folding his hands, "will be direct." I appreciated honesty when it was genuine. "Our daughter has a bright future," he continued. "Daniel is a good young man, but marriage is about more than love. Stability matters." "I agree," I said calmly. He leaned forward. "Emily is used to a certain lifestyle, comfort, security. We want to be sure she won't struggle." There it was. Not concern, calculation. "I raised my son to stand on his own," I replied. "He works hard." "Yes, but ambition alone doesn't guarantee outcomes," her mother added smoothly. "We're just being realistic." I looked at them both, letting a pause stretch long enough to make them uncomfortable. "And what exactly are you asking?" I said. Her father cleared his throat. "Perhaps it would help if you contributed to the wedding or helped Daniel financially as a father." "Ah, the price." I smiled softly. "I live simply, I don't have much to give." The air shifted instantly. Her mother's smile faded. Her father leaned back, crossing his arms. "I see," he said. "Then maybe expectations need to be adjusted." "Adjusted how?" I asked. "Well," he said carefully, "Emily could delay marriage or reconsider. We only want what's best for her." That word again. Best. Not happiest, not loved, not respected. Best by their definition. I left the cafe with my dignity intact and my suspicions confirmed. That evening, Emily came to see me alone. She stood at my door nervously, hands clasped together like a child afraid of disappointing someone she respected. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I didn't know they would talk to you like that." I studied her face. Her eyes were honest, hurt, conflicted. "Sit," I said gently. She sat, shoulders slumped. "They think Daniel won't be able to give me the life they want." "And what do you want?" I asked. She hesitated. "I want peace. I want respect. I want a family built on love, not pressure." Her answer mattered. "But love alone doesn't silence loud parents." "I don't judge you by your parents' words," I told her. "But understand this, marriage tests everyone, not just the couple." Tears filled her eyes. I'm trying to stand up to them. "I know," I said. "The question is whether you'll keep standing when it gets harder." She nodded slowly. After she left, I made a decision. The test wasn't over. In fact, it was about to become much more uncomfortable for them. Because next, they would see just how disposable they believed my son was when they thought he had nothing to offer. A week passed. Then two. No calls from Emily's parents, no invitations, no polite check-ins disguised as concern, silence, thick and deliberate. Daniel noticed it too. "They haven't spoken to Emily since that lunch," he told me over the phone. "They keep telling her to think carefully." I could hear the strain in his voice. This wasn't about love anymore. It was about pressure, about control. I sighed slowly. Son, when people can't control outcomes, they try to control emotions. Emily, meanwhile, was being pulled in two directions. Her parents reminded her daily of what she would lose if she married Daniel: connections, comfort, influence. They spoke as if love were a lease agreement that expired the moment payments stopped. One evening, Emily called me herself. Her voice trembled. "They said something today, something I can't ignore." I listened. "They told me," she continued, "that if I married Daniel without their approval, I shouldn't expect help. Not emotionally, not financially, not ever." There it was. The ultimatum. I closed my eyes. "How did that make you feel?" I asked. "Like I was 12 years old again," she said quietly. "Like my happiness belongs to them." I chose my next words carefully. "Emily, independence always comes with a price. The question is whether the cost is worth the freedom." She was silent for a long moment. Then she whispered, "I think it is." That night, I knew the test had reached its turning point. Emily's parents weren't just judging me anymore. They were preparing to remove my son from the equation. A few days later, Daniel received an invitation, only his name on it. Dinner private at Emily's parents' home. My instinct tightened. "They didn't invite Emily?" I asked. "No," Daniel said. "They said they want to talk man to man." I didn't like the sound of that. "Go," I told him, "but listen more than you speak." He did. When he returned, his face said everything before his mouth ever opened. "They offered me something," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Offered?" "A job in her uncle's firm, triple my salary, luxury apartment, travel opportunities." I leaned back slowly. "And the condition?" I asked. Daniel swallowed. "That I postpone the wedding indefinitely." There it was. They weren't buying approval. They were buying obedience. "They said Emily deserves someone who can match her world," Daniel continued. "They said if I cared about her, I'd step aside until I could." I clenched my fist, but calmly. "And what did you say?" I asked. "I said no," he replied without hesitation. "I said I won't trade my dignity for comfort." My heart swelled. But I also knew what was coming next. Because people who are rejected don't retreat quietly. They escalate. 2 days later, Emily's parents showed up at my door. Unannounced. They sat in my modest living room, eyes scanning the furniture, the walls, the space, measuring me again. "We think emotions are clouding judgment," her father said. yours included. I smiled faintly. Emotion often reveals what logic hides. Her mother folded her hands. Be practical, Henry. Daniel isn't ready to provide the kind of life Emily deserves. You mean the kind of life you approve of, I corrected gently. Her father leaned forward. Look, we're not bad people, we're generous. If Daniel steps back now, doors will remain open. And if he does, I asked. They exchanged a glance. Then Emily will move on, her mother said flatly. She has options. I nodded slowly. Then let me be equally practical, I said. My son won't be purchased, postponed, or replaced. Her father scoffed softly. Easy to say when you have nothing to lose. That sentence landed like a match near dry fuel. I stood up, not angrily, but deliberately. You're mistaken, I said. I have everything to lose. That's why I value character over comfort. They stood as well, clearly frustrated. As they reached the door, her father turned back. If you truly care about your son, he said, you'll convince him to let go. I met his eyes. If you truly care about your daughter, I replied, you'll stop treating love like a transaction. They left without another word. That night I sat alone again, but this time with clarity. The mask I wore had done its job. They believed I was powerless. They believed my son was disposable. And that belief was about to cost them more than they could imagine. Because soon, very soon, the truth would surface. And when it did, it wouldn't come from anger. It would come from consequences. The next morning, Daniel came to see me before work. He looked tired, eyes sunken, shoulders heavy, not the exhaustion of labor, but the kind that comes from emotional warfare. They told Emily they're cutting her off, he said quietly. No access to family accounts, no support, no invitations, nothing. I exhaled slowly. And Emily, I asked. She packed a bag, he said. She left their house last night. That took courage. She's staying with a friend for now, he added. They told her she's choosing struggle over stability. I leaned forward, and what did she say? That she's choosing herself. For the first time in days, I smiled. But I also knew this wasn't over. Families like hers didn't surrender control so easily. They simply changed tactics. That afternoon, Emily's mother called me. Her tone was softer now, concern wrapped in politeness. Henry, she said, things have gotten emotional. They usually do when control slips, I replied calmly. We are worried about Emily, she continued. She's acting irrationally. She's acting independently, I corrected. A pause. We think it would help if you spoke to Daniel, she said. Encourage him to slow things down, let tempers cool. I almost laughed. You mean convince him to wait until you regain leverage, I said gently. Her voice sharpened. You're being unfair. No, I replied, I'm being clear. She hung up. That evening, Daniel and Emily came over together. Emily looked exhausted but resolute. She sat close to Daniel, fingers interlaced, silent proof of unity. Dad, Daniel said, we've decided to get engaged quietly. No big party, no parents. I studied their faces. Are you doing this out of love or defiance? I asked. Emily answered without hesitation, love. I nodded, then you have my blessing. Relief washed over them. But joy didn't last long. 2 days later, Emily's parents made their boldest move yet. They announced publicly that the engagement was a mistake. At a family gathering. In front of relatives. They framed it as concern, as wisdom, as protection. They told everyone Daniel came from a background that couldn't sustain Emily long-term. They implied she was being reckless. They implied we were beneath them. Emily found out through a cousin. She called me in tears. They're rewriting the story, she said. They're making us look foolish. I closed my eyes. That was the moment I stopped observing and started preparing. I made a call I hadn't made in years. Then another, and another. Not to threaten, not to boast, but to set the stage for truth. Because dignity doesn't need volume, only timing. The following weekend, Emily's parents hosted a large family dinner. They invited everyone, except Daniel, except me, except Emily. But fate has a sense of humor. One of their relatives, someone who had once worked with my company, recognized my name when my son was mentioned. Henry, construction, retired. The pieces clicked quietly. Whispers began. Questions followed. And by the time Emily's parents realized something was shifting, it was too late. Because the truth has a way of surfacing when arrogance gets careless. Meanwhile, I invited Daniel and Emily to dinner. Just the three of us. Simple food, warm lights. No pressure. I haven't told you everything about me, I said calmly. They both looked up. There are parts of my life I kept private, intentionally. Daniel frowned slightly. Dad. I pretended to be poor for a reason, I continued, not to deceive, but to reveal. Emily's eyes widened. I wanted to see who would treat my son with respect when they thought he had nothing to offer. Silence filled the room. And Daniel asked softly. I saw enough, I said. Emily swallowed. Does that mean? I won't say more tonight, I interrupted gently. But know this, you are not alone, and what comes next will answer every doubt they planted. They exchanged confused glances, but trusted me. As they left that night, I stood by the window. The storm was approaching, and when it broke, it would wash away every false measure of worth they believed in. The next morning, Daniel came to see me before work. He looked tired, eyes sunken, shoulders heavy, not the exhaustion of labor, but the kind that comes from emotional warfare. They told Emily they're cutting her off, he said quietly. No access to family accounts, no support, no invitations, nothing. I exhaled slowly. And Emily, I asked. She packed a bag, he said. She left their house last night. That took courage. She's staying with a friend for now, he added. They told her she's choosing struggle over stability. I leaned forward, and what did she say? That she's choosing herself. For the first time in days, I smiled. But I also knew this wasn't over. Families like hers didn't surrender control so easily. They simply changed tactics. That afternoon, Emily's mother called me. Her tone was softer now, concern wrapped in politeness. Henry, she said, things have gotten emotional. They usually do when control slips, I replied calmly. We are worried about Emily, she continued. She's acting irrationally. She's acting independently, I corrected. A pause. We think it would help if you spoke to Daniel, she said. Encourage him to slow things down, let tempers cool. I almost laughed. You mean convince him to wait until you regain leverage, I said gently. Her voice sharpened. You're being unfair. No, I replied. I'm being clear. She hung up. That evening, Daniel and Emily came over together. Emily looked exhausted but resolute. She sat close to Daniel, fingers interlaced, silent proof of unity. Dad, Daniel said, we've decided to get engaged quietly. No big party, no parents. I studied their faces. Are you doing this out of love or defiance? I asked. Emily answered without hesitation, love. I nodded, then you have my blessing. Relief washed over them. But joy didn't last long. 2 days later, Emily's parents made their boldest move yet. They announced, publicly, that the engagement was a mistake. At a family gathering, in front of relatives, they framed it as concern, as wisdom, as protection. They told everyone Daniel came from a background that couldn't sustain Emily long-term. They implied she was being reckless. They implied we were beneath them. Emily found out through a cousin. She called me in tears. "They're rewriting the story," she said. "They're making us look foolish." I closed my eyes. That was the moment I stopped observing and started preparing. I made a call I hadn't made in years. Then another, and another. Not to threaten, not to boast, but to set the stage for truth. Because dignity doesn't need volume, only timing. The following weekend, Emily's parents hosted a large family dinner. They invited everyone, except Daniel, except me, except Emily. But fate has a sense of humor. One of their relatives, someone who had once worked with my company, recognized my name when my son was mentioned. "Henry, construction, retired." The pieces clicked quietly. Whispers began. Questions followed. And by the time Emily's parents realized something was shifting, it was too late. Because the truth has a way of surfacing when arrogance gets careless. Meanwhile, I invited Daniel and Emily to dinner. Just the three of us. Simple food, warm lights. No pressure. "I haven't told you everything about me," I said calmly. They both looked up. "There are parts of my life I kept private, intentionally." Daniel frowned slightly. "Dad." "I pretended to be poor for a reason," I continued. "Not to deceive, but to reveal." Emily's eyes widened. "I wanted to see who would treat my son with respect when they thought he had nothing to offer." Silence filled the room. And Daniel asked softly. "I saw enough," I said. Emily swallowed. "Does that mean—" "I won't say more tonight," I interrupted gently. "But know this, you are not alone, and what comes next will answer every doubt they planted." They exchanged confused glances, but trusted me. As they left that night, I stood by the window. The storm was approaching. And when it broke, it would wash away every false measure of worth they believed in. The invitation arrived on thick cream paper. Emily's parents were hosting a large charity fundraiser, one of their favorite ways to display generosity in public. Business partners, extended family, community leaders, everyone who mattered would be there. And this time, my name was on the list. Not as Daniel's poor, retired father. Just Henry. That alone told me they knew. I showed the invitation to Daniel and Emily. "They want to impress you," Emily said quietly. "No," I replied. "They want to correct the narrative before someone else does." I decided to attend. Not for revenge. For closure. That evening, the hall glittered with polished marble floors and crystal lights. People moved in tailored suits and elegant dresses, laughing loudly, exchanging cards, measuring one another's worth with every handshake. I entered alone. Not because I lacked company, but because truth doesn't need escorts. At first, no one noticed me. Then someone did. A man froze mid-conversation. "Henry," he said, stepping closer. "Henry Thompson." I nodded. His face lit up. "I thought you moved abroad. I worked on the Riverside project under you 20 years ago." Voices nearby quieted. Others turned. More recognition followed. "Henry, the Northbridge developments. You're the one who backed the hospital wing, right? I didn't know you still attended events like this." The room changed temperature. Emily's parents noticed. I saw it in the way Emily's father straightened, in the way her mother's smile stiffened. They hurried over. Henry, her father exclaimed too loudly, "So glad you could make it." People watched, listened, measured. He introduced me carefully now, respectfully, with pride he hadn't earned. "This is Henry," he said, "a longtime friend of the family." I corrected him gently. "I'm Daniel's father." The silence that followed was almost polite. Then someone asked the question they had all been thinking. "Daniel, your son," a woman said, "the engineer." "Yes," I replied, "a good man." Whispers rippled outward. Understanding dawned in pieces. Emily's parents realized in real time that their judgment hadn't been private. It had been witnessed and remembered. Later that evening, Emily arrived with Daniel. They walked in together, calm, dignified, unafraid. Eyes followed them. Conversations paused. Emily's parents stiffened. I stepped forward and placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "This is my son," I said clearly, "and this is his fiancée." No hesitation. No apology. Just truth. Applause didn't erupt. But respect did. Subtle, genuine, unavoidable. People approached Daniel now, not to assess, but to engage. Opportunities surfaced, not offered by me, but by those who valued character once it was visible. Emily's parents stood apart, their expressions caught between pride and regret. Later, Emily's father approached me quietly. "We didn't know," he said. I looked at him calmly. "You didn't ask," I replied. He swallowed. "We misjudged Daniel." "No," I said softly, "you judged him correctly by your standards. They just weren't good ones." That night ended without confrontation, without shouting, without satisfaction. But something far more powerful had occurred. The truth had walked in, and it didn't need to explain itself. The morning after the fundraiser, Daniel came to see me early. He didn't sit down right away. He stood near the window, staring outside like someone processing a dream they weren't sure had ended. "They called," he said. I nodded. I expected that. "Both of them," he continued. "Separate calls, different tones, same message." "And what was that?" I asked. "They want to apologize," he said. "They want to start over." I folded my hands calmly. "Do you want to hear it?" He hesitated. "That's the problem," he admitted. "I don't know if it's for us or for their reputation." That was the right question. Emily arrived later that day. She looked composed, but her eyes carried old fatigue. "They want a family meeting," she said, "all of us together." I studied her carefully. "And how do you feel about that?" She took a breath. "Part of me wants peace, another part wants boundaries." "Peace without boundaries," I said gently, "is just silence waiting to break again." That afternoon, we agreed to meet on one condition. It would be at my home. Not theirs. No stage. No audience. Just truth. They arrived on time. That alone was new. Emily's parents sat across from Daniel and Emily, hands folded, posture careful. Her father spoke first. "We owe you an apology," he said, "to both of you." He paused, choosing words like fragile glass. "We let assumptions guide us. We were wrong." Emily listened, but didn't respond. Her mother leaned forward. We were trying to protect her future. Emily finally spoke. "You were protecting control," she said calmly, "not me." Silence fell. That sentence landed where years of argument never could. Then her father turned to Daniel. "I misjudged you," he said. "I measured you unfairly." Daniel nodded once. "Yes, you did." No anger, no softness, just fact. They turned to me last. "We judged you by appearances," her mother said quietly. I met her eyes. "And treated my son accordingly," I added. Her eyes dropped. That was the first real apology. Not for embarrassment, not for misunderstanding, but for behavior. Still, apologies don't erase patterns, they only open doors. The question was whether anyone would walk through them differently. I spoke then, not as a wealthy man, not as a judge, but as a father. My son's future is not a negotiation, I said calmly. You are welcome in their lives, but not as decision-makers. Emily's parents exchanged glances. Her father nodded slowly. We understand. I leaned forward. No, I said gently, understanding isn't agreement, it's behavior over time. They accepted that. Reluctantly, but sincerely enough to begin. That evening, after they left, Daniel sat beside me. I didn't feel small today, he said quietly, for the first time. I placed a hand on his shoulder. That's what dignity feels like, I said. Remember it. Emily hugged me tightly. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing what no one else did. I smiled softly. I didn't test you to judge, I said. I tested to protect. And as they left that night, together, steady, unshaken, I knew the final chapter wasn't about wealth revealed. It was about worth reclaimed. The weeks that followed were different. Not perfect, not suddenly warm and effortless, but honest. Emily's parents kept their distance, not out of pride this time, but caution. Every call was measured, every visit brief. They were learning slowly that involvement did not mean control. The wedding planning moved forward quietly. No extravagant venues, no guest lists designed to impress, just something meaningful, something theirs. One evening, Daniel came to me with a folded envelope. They offered to pay for everything, he said, the wedding, the apartment, even a new car. I looked at him calmly, and this time, he said, there were no conditions. That gave me pause. Sometimes generosity is genuine. Sometimes it's insurance. What do you want? I asked. He exhaled. I want to accept only what doesn't come with strings. I nodded, then accept nothing you wouldn't be comfortable refusing later. Emily felt the same. They decided to pay for the wedding themselves, small, simple, honest. Emily's parents didn't argue. That told me something important. Then came the moment I hadn't expected. Emily's mother asked to meet me alone. She arrived without her usual polish, no jewelry, no practiced smile. Just a woman who looked tired. I've been thinking, she said after sitting down, about why this hurt me so much. I waited. I realized, she continued, that when I thought you were poor, I felt superior. When I learned the truth, I felt ashamed. She looked at me, eyes glossy. I don't know how to undo that. I considered her carefully. You don't undo it, I said gently. You live differently from it. She nodded slowly. Then she did something unexpected. She reached into her bag and placed an envelope on the table. Inside was a deed. A small house. This was meant to be a wedding gift, she said, but after everything, I don't want to give it to control them. I want to give it because they chose love over comfort. I closed the folder and pushed it back toward her. Give it to them after the wedding, I said, when it can't be mistaken for influence. She smiled faintly. You're wiser than you look, Henry. I smiled back. That's been my advantage. The wedding day arrived on a quiet afternoon. Sunlight filtered through trees, chairs were arranged simply, laughter came easily. No speeches about wealth, no performances of generosity. Just two people choosing each other. When it was time for me to speak, I stood slowly. I once pretended to be poor, I said calmly, not to deceive, but to learn. People listened. I learned that love survives pressure, that dignity matters more than approval, and that true wealth is revealed when nothing is expected in return. I looked at Daniel, then at Emily. My son is rich, I concluded, because he chose character, and that will outlast everything else. Applause followed, not loud but sincere. As the sun dipped lower, I felt peace. But one final moment remained. One last truth, quiet, personal, and powerful. The wedding ended the way all meaningful moments should, without noise, without spectacle, and without regret. As guests slowly drifted away and the lights dimmed, Daniel and Emily stayed behind to help clear the last chairs. Not because they had to, but because that's who they were. Later that evening, Daniel returned alone. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. "Dad," he said quietly, "there's something I need to ask you." I nodded and gestured for him to sit. "Why did you really do it?" he asked. The pretending, the silence, the patience. I took a long breath. "There are things a father teaches with words," I said, "and things he teaches by example." I stood and walked to the old wooden cabinet in the corner of the room. I opened it and pulled out a thin folder, worn at the edges, untouched for years. I placed it on the table in front of him. "What's this?" he asked. "My life," I replied. Inside were documents, property records, investment summaries, company transfers, trust papers. Daniel's eyes widened as he turned page after page. "Dad," he whispered, "all this time." "I didn't hide it because I didn't trust you," I said gently. "I hid it because I trusted you enough not to need it." He leaned back slowly, overwhelmed. "I wanted to know," I continued, "that when the world tested you, when people thought you had nothing, you would still stand tall." He looked up at me, eyes wet. "I learned that from you," he said. I smiled softly. "There's more," I added. I handed him a final envelope. Inside was a letter, written years ago, sealed and dated long before Emily ever entered our lives. "What is this?" he asked. "My condition," I said, "for everything you've just seen." He read silently. The letter was simple. "If you are reading this, it means you chose love over leverage, dignity over comfort, and character over approval. That choice makes you worthy of everything I built, not because you are my son, but because you are a good man." Daniel closed the letter and covered his face. "I didn't know," he said through emotion, "that I was being tested my whole life." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "We all are," I said. "The question is only when and who's watching." That night, as he left, I sat alone again. But this time, the silence felt complete. The mask was gone. The lesson delivered. Only one chapter remained. A few weeks after the wedding, my house felt quieter than usual. Not lonely, just complete. Daniel and Emily had settled into their new life, not the house her parents eventually gifted them, but a small rented place they chose first. They wanted to begin with something that belonged only to them. That choice told me everything. One afternoon, Emily's parents came by together. No tension, no performance. Just two people who had learned something uncomfortable, but valuable. "We don't expect forgiveness," her father said honestly. "We only want to earn trust." I nodded. "Trust isn't granted," I said. "It's observed." They understood. Time passed, and slowly, behavior replaced words. They stopped giving advice disguised as instructions. They asked instead of demanded. They listened, sometimes awkwardly but sincerely. Emily began to breathe easier around them. That mattered more than apologies ever could. On my 68th birthday, Daniel invited me to dinner. Just family. At the end of the meal, he stood and raised a glass. "My father once pretended to be poor," he said, "not to trick anyone, but to protect what mattered most." He looked at Emily. "Because of him, I know that love doesn't ask for proof of wealth. only proof of character. I felt something tighten in my chest. Later that night, as I prepared to leave, Emily hugged me. "You didn't just test us," she said softly. "You saved us from a future built on fear." I smiled. "No," I replied. "You saved yourselves. I just removed the noise." As I drove home, I thought about everything I'd learned. Money can open doors, but it also closes hearts. Pride builds walls. And pretending to be poor taught me more about people than being rich ever did. So if there's one thing I leave behind, one lesson worth passing on, it's this. Never measure worth by what someone owns. Measure it by what they're willing to stand for when they believe no one is watching. Before I end, let me ask you something gently. Where are you listening to this from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. I read them, and they remind me these stories reach real people. And if this story touched you, support the channel by liking, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who believes character still matters. The next story is already on its way. Because dignity can never be taken. It can only be given away.